According to the Department of Statistics Singapore, in 2024, the sex ratio in Singapore was 948 males to 1,000 females. Now that's an interesting statistic, right? Women also now hold more than 20% of board positions, up from just 8% a decade ago. But 36% of boards have no women at all, according to the 2025 Board Diversity Index. Why aren't there more women on boards? Or, for that matter, more women in leadership roles? What are women doing or not doing? Or are we looking at it the wrong way? And the truth is, women don't want to be in leadership and don't want to be on boards. To delve into these questions and more, I'm joined by Wong Board Chairperson, James Cook University, Singapore. Gregory Vijayendran, Partner, Raja & Tan, Singapore. And returning here again, Ling, NTUC Assistant Secretary General and Director of U Women and Family and USME. Welcome, all of you. I am so looking forward to this conversation. Now, this is Lens on Singapore, and for the record, I'm Claressa Monteiro. I want to start by asking Gregory, have you ever worked for a lady boss?
I've been very privileged in the non-profit work that I do to work with some of the best women leaders, Mrs. Lim Hui Hua, presently Anita Pham, and also Teresa Goh, and the latter two on National Council of Social Services as well as Charity Council. And they've been among the finest leaders that I've had the privilege to work with and work under.
Okay, so I'm assuming at some point you also worked for male bosses.
Definitely.
Is there, in your perspective, any real difference between working for a man or working for a woman? Be honest. Don't let them scare you.
It's hard to generalize, Clarissa. And, each leader is different. Each leader brings different strengths to the table. But I have noticed that our women leaders are very strong with EQ, with being inclusive of everyone in the team.
Thank you.
And that's very refreshing because every view, every voice is heard. And I think that people-orientedness and that ability to apply EQ has been a standout feature for me.
Okay. Can I just say, that was such a PC answer. But I can't say that I disagree with you. I've had the privilege of working for a fantastic woman boss. And at the start of my career, which would have been very important because I had a benchmark of what great female leadership looks like. Now, let's take a broad look at women in leadership roles in Singapore. Ling, this one is for you. You women and all that, right?
Yes, women
Past
power.
and present.
Right.
Past to present. What does female leadership representation look like? Do you have some stats for us?
Well, two very good stats pop into my mind. The first one, as you know, I'm an MP, and actually today it's a Parliament Day. And I'm actually very proud that this sitting for Parliament, we actually have close to 30% of our MPs being females. I think this is an amazing stat because if you think about this, it hasn't always been like that. Quite recently, like maybe about just 20 years ago, I think we only had one female MP. Imagine that, one. And the other thing too, because I also wear another hat, as with all women, we have many multiple hats. Well, it actually has to do with the unions. So I am running the Women's Committee over at the Labour Movement, we're at the NTUC. And one of the things that we have realized is that we are getting more and more females coming up to be union leaders. I think that's very important. I hope that eventually we will be able to get more than 50% of, because I just heard your stat, so it's actually not 50-50. But, in terms of representation, I hope that we will be able to get more female union leaders. But beyond that as well, it's female union leaders in actually the top 5.
Suyen, you are a board member. And it wasn't that long ago that there was almost no female representation on boards.
Yes.
Current day, it's a nice percentage, as I said, but there are, as I said, many boards that have no female representation.
Or maybe just have one.
Or maybe just have one.
Yes.
So what do you think has been the most effective driver to get as many women on boards in the last 10 years as there are?
So I always think of this as supply and demand, right? So the first part is you got to have enough supply. So the pipeline of women coming through who are board ready, who have assumed leadership roles, and who are then ready to take on board roles. And I think on that, there's been a lot of advocacy, whether it's the Council for Board Diversity, Singapore Institute of Directors, they've all been really focused on developing that. So on the demand side, one of the things that has really, I think, moved the needle has been the introduction of the 9-year rule. So once you put in place mechanisms that mandate rotation of board directors, that naturally opens up the process. And when open up the process, that then brings different people in. So I think it's really about supply and demand.
You know, Claressa, if I could just add to that, I actually do think that it is not just about the supply and demand. I think it's also about the openness to look at different pockets of expertise when it comes to board directorships. For instance, I know a lot of people who are looking for board directors want people who can read P&L and all that. But I think beyond that, there's so many other things that you can be looking at. You can be, for instance, looking at people who are really good at social media.
You're spot on, Wan Ling. I mean, I think very often you think about board directors as having a particular mold and, sorry, Gregory, overabundance of lawyers and accountants. Nothing wrong with lawyers and accountants. We love them dearly. But increasingly, talent is a huge issue for boards. Digital is a huge director for boards. Sustainability is a huge issue for boards. Communications, right? So that means that you do need to widen the net.
Okay, so let's put a different nuance on this. At my intro, I said, are we looking at it wrongly? Maybe women don't want to be on boards. Maybe women don't want to be in the leadership roles that might be open to them. And maybe that is why there aren't as many women in leadership roles as there could be. Do you think there's any credibility to that point of view?
I think if you look at it from a very, traditional way, then perhaps because women actually do have a lot of different cycles to their lives, it might not necessarily fit in with the more male-dominated way of looking at leadership. So if you think about this, most guys, they have a very linear pathway when it comes to their career progressions. And I think a lot of it is because the women in their lives take on a lot of slack for them when it comes to doing things for the family or doing things at home. And whereas females, if you look at their cycles, they do move in and out of whether it's the workplace, whether or not it's leadership positions. Sometimes, you really need to stop work because of caregiving. And I think we all know caregivers who were in that situations. And so I think we do need to redefine what is leadership. And it's not only just for females, but I do think it is for Singapore in general because the face and the demographic of families have also changed in Singapore and the aspirations of people have also changed.
I'm thinking there was a time when for a man, you go to school, you go to the army, and then it's your career.
Yeah.
You get married or whatever. The woman would take care of the house, would take care of the kids, right? And you could just pursue your career. It's not so cut and dried. And I also wonder, in the same way that women want to step back and take care of the kids, step back, go back to school, how difficult do you think that is for a guy to make decisions like that? Because then it's not so linear anymore.
Right, that's right.
Yes, I think there are winds of change, these days. But certainly, I think we have to examine this issue from, I think, a cultural perspective. There still exists, I think, misperceptions, biases, in society. In some settings, there's a perception that men can do a better job in terms of leadership. But I think I'm heartened by the attitudes and the changes that we're seeing with some of our younger men who are willing to play greater roles. And I think the government should be commended, for example, for the paternity leave.
Yes, the shared paternity leave, that's right.
Which I think is a recognition that child rearing these days is really a shared responsibility. We're seeing more men in parent-teacher association meetings, engaged in their children's education. So all of these things are
and
positives.
Being the primary contact,
I think,
for childcare and all that. That's important.
And that's critical, So I think we are seeing some of this. It's probably not enough yet, and probably will have some distance to go.
Greg, when you talked about the shared parental leave, it put a smile on my face because there has been a little bit of a discussion over at the labor movement about whether guys, if they put up their hands and say that, I want to take, dad's leave and all that, whether or not culturally within the organization they will be looked down upon.
But I think that is the crux of the issue.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think this is something that is important with this legislation coming in, that all of us have that conversation. Because I think the more you talk about it, the more normalized it becomes.
There you go.
Yes,
I
especially
think
with
when
elderly.
we normalize caregiving as gender neutral, we will see more women in the workplace and in leadership roles, because it is one of those things that I think we still have societal hangups about.
I have to say, as a mom of adult men, both of my sons have said unequivocally, if my wife out-earns me,
Yeah.
has a more senior role to mine, I will step back. I'll be the stay-home parent.
Yep.
So that she can fly.
And it's kudos to you.
You raised them well.
you
Well
raised them
done. Well done.
But because gender was never an issue, you know, it's whoever's career was on the high,
Yes.
was
the best person for the job and not
And
the
best
best
person for the
female or the
job.
best male.
And the
Yeah.
woman needs to be okay with that too.
Yes.
Because I'll just share an anecdote. There's a woman, I saw her speak in the U.S., and she was actually running a very large hotel, Carlson Wagonlit hotel chain, right? Very large. And she had given birth to her son, newborn. She was back in the office. And her husband was up on the roof and somehow had the newborn up on the roof with him. And her mother-in-law calls and says, did you know that your husband's up on the roof with her son? So she calls in and she says, is everything okay? He says, yeah, no, everything's okay. And then she said, I had to learn to let him parent in his way.
Yeah,
So I think there's something to be said
the guys
there
are
too
definitely going to take
about-
their kids up on the roof. Yes.
Not suggesting.
I have
I'm not suggesting. I'm not
Yes.
suggesting that's a best practice. But I think the point is right, which is that if we expect men to also play that caregiving role, then women also need to
Step back.
allow men
Yeah.
to
that
step
space-
up.
that
to step
space
up.
to do
yes.
that. Yeah.
Okay, so far what I'm hearing is there has been a sea change in thinking about male-female roles.
Yes.
Now the question is, how do we make sure that this momentum keeps moving forward and gaining? Let's start with you, Gregory.
Yeah. So, I thought Wan Ling made a brilliant point about cycles. And I think it's about knowing the various cycles in, a family's journey, in a married couple's journey, the seasons of our lives, what's important, what's of priority at that time, the kind of conversations that need to be had.
Yes.
So I think that's critical. That's going to be personal. That's going to be obviously left to each marriage and family to navigate. But I think the consciousness of this needs to be out there. At the same time, I think from the perspective of government, society, civil society, we need to put in systems in place and build this broader ecosystem where, in the same way that Council for Board Diversity has an intentionality about the percentages that they want to accomplish,
Right.
That actually makes it a conversational topic. It puts it out on the radar so that, it's in the national consciousness. And the hope is, of course, that, as people talk more, it becomes normalized,
Yes.
like Wan Ling says as well. And then I think at the same time, we need to also think about mentoring for our women, which is a very, very big piece as well.
Yes.
How do we find ways to help them, have a leg up and
Yeah.
to have their own career tracking and to find the right model so that they progress upwards as well.
Yeah.
Playing devil's advocate
Yes.
again. Because we're talking about, women and how do we support them. But I have experienced this myself with a woman boss. And a woman boss who, once she got ahead of us, the rest of the women in the team, basically shut us out. And would put forward the men rather than supporting the women. At this table, I want to ask very candidly, have you encountered as women other women blocking you, and yet it's the guys that have supported you?
That is a saying that's going around now about how sometimes female eat your own young. And as a female boss, sometimes I often have to remind myself that I shouldn't have such high expectations beyond what is necessary for my female subordinates. sometimes if they want to take child giving leave, and I'll tell myself that actually, when I was going through this, I didn't have to do it. So I don't understand why you have to do it.
So you have to keep putting yourself in
Yes,
check.
exactly. So I have to check myself. And I think this is important, and it is this type of self-awareness that will make any boss a good boss, a wise boss.
I think if we take a step back, the bigger issue is that the nature of work is changing.
Yes.
Fundamentally changing. There is no linear anymore, or very rare.
Right.
So for men and for women, it's about having the flexibility to balance your seasons of life. And you
Right.
see that with, people sort of, talk about the Gen Z and what their expectations are. It's
The micro-retirements, I remember.
It's exactly the
Micro-retirements.
same thing, just manifests in a different way, which is that we're going to go through different seasons. And why is this? Look at the economics of how this works, which is business models used to run, 20, 25 years. Now they're like 7 to 10 years, which means that your company's going to change really, really quickly, which means that you can't be in the same job for 30 years, right? So people are going to have to really think about jobs and careers very differently, men and women.
I think you're right. It is that paradigm shift. And I think the question for us is also, as Asians, it's not even just a professional way of thinking. It is also a cultural way
Yeah.
of thinking that we have to overcome.
Yeah.
Men were taught they had to go out and be
Yeah.
the provider.
The provider.
Women were supposed to be
Yes.
the nurturers.
Yeah.
But those roles, to be quite honest, my father was a better nurturer than my mother was. Because she would just be, what are you crying for? Get up. You're not even bleeding.
Tiger mom.
Get up. And my dad
Complemented
would
each
be
other.
like, oh, there.
And that's why you're so lovely, actually.
Oh, really?
There you go.
I'm not saying anything. But I wanted, looking ahead, to bring in the Council for Board Diversity. Now, there's a target to raise women's participations on boards in the top 100 listed companies in Singapore to at least 30% by 2030. Personally, I don't actually think that's unattainable.
Yeah, I think we're on track. Yep.
I think we might even go beyond 30%. Because 5 years is a long time.
Yes.
But what steps do we need to ensure that we get that? And we get board-ready female professionals, not just women.
Yep.
We don't
Yes.
want just any women.
Exactly.
We want good women.
Exactly. And I think, metrics or targets are a blunt tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they work so long as, again, you have clarity around what you're looking for. So I would say a few things need to happen. What is it that the organization needs? What do I currently have on my board? And then what are those gaps? Now let me go find people who fit those gaps.
Right.
So that's one aspect. And the second aspect is really opening up the pool, whether it's executive search firms or putting a listing up on the Singapore Institute of Directors board listing portal. That just opens up an entire universe of people that you probably didn't know. I think when people start to see that diversity is actually, it's not just diversity for its own sake, but it has an impact. So what's the impact of the diversity? Maybe you're better able to connect to your customers, maybe to your employees, to your new issues that are on the table. Then you sort of get, okay, then it becomes self-reinforcing. So I agree with you. I think I'm hopeful that we'll exceed the target.
What do you think? Will we exceed? Gregory?
Okay.
Most definitely.
Yes, I think we would. I would hope we would. But I think we have to look at this in a much broader way, because really the focal point, as far as the CBD is concerned, is the top 100, as it were. But the question is, what's happening to the rest of the listed companies out there? What's the percentages like? Whether or not this example, this pioneering, this trailblazing by the largest companies, largest stat boards, the largest non-profit organizations can have this cascading effect on the rest
The
of the
SMEs
sector and
and
the
all
rest
that,
of the
yeah.
SMEs, so that we see the change really across the board. And I think, there's probably a lot more that we need to be thinking about in a deeper way, which is that I think beyond a number, how do we sustain a number? How does this exercise look like something that goes beyond tokenism
Yes.
or
Yeah.
quasi-affirmative action?
Yes.
But that we look at the journey of the women leader within the company itself.
Clarissa, I just wanted to share this. I think for us women, we do get a lot of inspiration from stories of other women. So, you inspired me a little bit just now when you talked about your dad. But it also reminded me of something that happened this weekend because we actually had an International Women's Day celebration and I was moderating a panel. And one of the panelists, she's actually a second generation leader. So she's a female and she actually not only does she run her family business, but she also runs her family. Mm-hmm. And one of the learnings from there was that she said growing up in a family, there was no gender biasness. And her dad and her mom, it wasn't about like, you're a boy, you need to do this, a girl, you need to do this. It was about just do what you want to do, and we're here to support you. And I think in building up that building block for women equality, for women empowerment and all that, actually a lot of it starts from the family.
Yeah, can we get rid of gendered expectations, right? For men and women, like boys, you have to do this, and girls, you have to do that. You have to play with
can't
that.
do this.
Or you have to play with this and that. You have to play with the other thing, or this color versus that color. Can we get rid of that?
It kind of like confines you to do a certain thing.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, that's a good place for us to leave this. Su-Yan, Gregory, Wan Ling, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I think we raised some very interesting questions, certainly thought-provoking ones. And I like the fact that we didn't necessarily answer all those questions because now we can all go back and think about what those questions are and how we really feel about them, and then put them in your different roles and bring the question of women empowerment, leadership, board representation, where men fit into all of this forward together.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for that. This has been Lens on Singapore. Thank you for listening.